Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Holy Human podcast. In this podcast, we dive into nuanced conversations about the full spectrum human experience. This is a space devoted to those who live to bridge worlds, a space where we explore the dance of polarity, the mystery of life, and God. A space where the masculine and the feminine, the mystical and the practical, the holy and the human come together. My name is Felix Whitman. I'm your host, and I invite you to today's episode. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. Her name is Ginger Kern, also known as Mythic Feminine on Instagram. She's a writer, mentor, and guide for women on the path of the devotional feminine. So recording this episode with her literally felt like a dance, hence the name On the Dance of Eros and Logos. For those of you who are new to these terms, they come from Greek mythology and refer to the archetypal feminine Eros and masculine Logos principles of the cosmos. On this vast topic of the masculine feminine principles and dynamics, we're covering the full range, from exploring a more philosophical side to diving into a more embodied and practical side, as well as into some personal experience. So without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. I'd like to start this episode by just asking what's currently present for you, what's currently alive for you.
I'm gonna just throw a wrench in the plans here and say it's always funny to me how at the beginning of podcasts we start out so formal. We're like, hello, I am a serious person. So that's what's alive for me. I just feel like a little bit of that playful springtime energy that's
I like that.
Really, really glad to be here. Really glad to be. I mean, it sounds very cliche, but I am genuinely glad to be alive today. So, anyway, yeah, there's a lot more that's alive for me, but that's really what was initially present there.
I like that. Yeah, the playfulness. Just it's my first podcast episode, and it's quite interesting how, like.
Yeah.
I didn't want to include like a formal introduction and just start with what's present right now. And yeah, we've talked before, and you mentioned that you are about to launch something that is coming alive that you've seeded.
Yeah. So I guess for anyone who's new to me or new to my writing or my work with women, the first thing that I just would be honored to share and to feel witnessed and known for or known in at this current juncture in my life is really just my willingness to listen to what is wanting to come through. And that is a very different way of relating to my life, which it's just brought me so many blessings, and I certainly did not have access to that way of orienting to life many years ago. And you and I were speaking about this before we hit record, of course, but just the strong mental layers that most of us have, right? Like this very thick and dense and almost like static layers of the mind that, when it's not constellated in proper hierarchy with the heart, the womb for a woman, for example, or just with the soul, let's say, when the mind is not the servant of the soul, it becomes very challenging to create anything that is of essence or like of the spirit. I feel it is my joy, my like a great burden and a blessing to be in a place in my life now where I do have the luxury of creating from spirit. And that feels very alive for me, to be honest. It's like incredibly exciting. And I have no idea what exactly this particular group journey will look like. But to your point, since you brought it up, I know for certain, because this is just what's come through, that the space of, let's call it like the devotional feminine, which of course, you've observed me writing in and mentoring in for many years now. The space itself is so gorgeous, and I see a missing. And there was a seed that was planted in me about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, where I received, again, sounds so cliche, I received a download. These phrases that sort of spiritual people use. But I'll play the
Right.
language for a moment. But I received a real deep clunk of a knowing, where I saw that there was a real gap in terms of the women who are called forth into service in this field, in this template, which we can talk a whole bunch about templates. I'm very excited for that. In this lifetime, as part of many lifetimes, there is not the support that is needed, I feel, to help women who are extremely high caliber on all levels: intelligence, emotional intelligence, nervous system capacity, spiritual knowing, oracular knowing, and on and on and on. There's not the support there for women of that capacity to really deepen in their own journeys, and also fully approve of how, honestly, a lot of them are very, very well constellated to be beautiful matches for highly powerful men. There's just not actually a lot of conversation around this. I feel like the majority of the conversation in this, again, like gorgeous space that I've been so enjoying writing inside of themes of devotion, themes of even more like traditional, quote unquote, feminine qualities, of receptivity, for example, or grace, or faith, or trust, right? All of that is so fundamental, so foundational. And yet it's like, once women have that sort of locked in their systems in like a really somatic way, the question becomes like, okay, well, what then? Like what are all of these gifts genuinely meant for? And I believe that they're meant for service in many different textures and flavors. And one of those textures that I feel is sorely underrepresented is the texture of service in union as consort to very powerful worldly men who currently are mostly flying blind. Like, they don't have their oracle by their sides. They're building, because of course, like, as you know, being a man yourself, your impulse is to create. Your impulse is to build into the world your vision.
Right.
To penetrate the world with your logos, with your sight. And that is gorgeous. And if it's simply just the logos principle penetrating the world, it's incomplete. It needs eros. It needs the spirit. It needs just that je ne sais quoi, from the feminine, from the counterpart. So that's a whole broad brushstroke over the entire sort of like ethos behind this group journey that is wanting to come through me somehow, and imperfectly. Like, I'm clear, it's not going to be perfect. I am an imperfect vessel.
Absolutely.
Entirely. But yeah, hopefully that at least opens the space for that specific like question topic.
Absolutely. So beautifully explained and opened the space. I would like to dive into like two terms that you've mentioned, which is on the one side Eros and on the other side Logos, and just like break them down a little bit further so that we can digest it a bit more easy.
Of course. Yeah. And, I love just the ability to interact, in real time also with you. So that question felt like logos to me. That was an organizing question. That was a directive question. It was, in a way, let's bring definition. Let's bring structure to the flow that's coming through me, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
question in and of itself is like very Logos, which is so beautiful. And the way that you're smiling and like sighing, in resonance with me, that feels to me, that's Eros. It's life force. It's the animation of that structure, right?
Mm.
So when you ask that question, I'm just like, well, there it is, right in the very asking of it itself. Like Logos meaning the sort of like the mental, I feel like in a way it's the precision of the exalted masculine,
Mm.
and Eros is the animation, the like I don't know, one texture of Eros that like very much comes to me is sort of the giddiness of what it is to be a woman who is like happy and joyful. That's like one
Mm-hmm.
texture of Eros. It's that sort of soulful animation that just can't help but flood out into the world. And there are other textures of Eros as well, of course. Um, but that's at least, a starting point for some definitions,
I
to
love that.
bring
I
the
really
Logos
love it.
principle.
And I
Yeah.
think it brings a lot of clarity just to see that in like these tangible examples, just like how I'm smiling refers to Eros, and like the question itself, bringing the structure or seeking the structure, is more a quality of Logos. Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's something that sits at the back of my mind, which refers to like in the spiritual community that I was in a couple of years ago. There were these terms alive, Christos and Sophia,
Mhm.
in relation to Logos and Eros. Um, would you say, have you heard of these terms first and foremost?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What's your relationship to these terms, to quickly dive into those?
The question makes me smile. Um,
Hmm.
so yes, of course, Christ Sophia, or as you put it, Christos Sophia. It is in a way like those words for me. They're very evocative of the like the human soulful human. Sort of use the both and embodiment of Eros Logos principles, or Logos Eros, to keep it really clean and neat. Christos Sophia, Logos Eros.
Mm-hmm.
I relate to so this will go directly into kind of the thread of religion, which I saw you posted a very small but potent little snippet earlier today, on the etymology of the word religion.
Thank
So
you. Yeah.
religare, right? Like to
Religere.
relink.
Yeah.
Religare, yeah, exactly. To relink, right? To connect.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say religion, that's like more so the relationship that I have to it. I'm not talking about institutional
Right.
Christ, right? But the
Yes.
Christos principle, the solar logos, cosmic dome, uh, archetypally masculine, all seeing, all knowing principle, as it is made manifest in various expressions in human men, in mortal men, in imperfect men, but nevertheless, masculine men at their core. That's sort of like the Christos sword of truth, if you will, embodied in mortal men here on this planet Earth. Sophia, the way that I feel her, capital H, her, um, for me anyway, personally, is really, really through the body of the earth, through the Gaian body, through the wisdom of everything nonlinear, the seasonality, cyclical nature, the mystery, the void, the principle that is the call, like the who am I principle, to which, of course, the archetypally masculine is principle is really the response. The I am, the sort of like line in the sand, the delineation, right? Again, the structure, the containment, the compartmentalization. So it's where I feel the sort of like Christos Sophia, and I understand we're playing in sort of a heady space already, but that's, let's be real, like between you and I, of course, that's going to happen, right? We're going to get very philosophical probably for the majority of this conversation. It's like you can't
It's
really
the
avoid it,
The Germans in us.
That's right. It's the German in both of us. Um, so, but with that, I mean, there comes like there comes a moment, and I believe, every human being's life, where they realize we are not the ones in the driver's seat of our entire lives. We cannot control, we cannot compartmentalize, we cannot structure everything. We can't make rules to ensure XYZ outcome. It's never going to work 100% of the time. Why? Because, of course, there's this whole other massive principle of like primordial chaos, in a way, the mystery that is just wildly unpin downable. You cannot pin her down. You can't box her in. It's not possible. And that's a really usually confronting moment for most people. Most people have not, through, let's say, education, traditional education, or through traditional family structures, been really given the gnosis through, let's say, more like ancient ceremonial rites around the mystery. Like, we don't really have many access points anymore, culturally, broadband culture speaking, directly into the mystery. And so when we are confronted inevitably with Sophia, wisdom, like true wisdom, very often it's incredibly confronting and scary, like really frightening, to the parts of us that are so programmed to be in Logos, to be sort of in subservience to the Christos principle. And I'll say subservience because of institutional religion, not because of the actual innate quality of the Christos principle itself. So, yeah. Anyway, that was probably super heady, and I apologize. But also,
No,
you asked the question, so...
Yeah, I led you there, and it's quite interesting just to dive into these topics and to explore from a more intellectual point of view. But then again, just bringing it back to the practical side of things and the experiential side of things, the body. That's where the life really happens, where like Sophia lives in the body. And that's also why I'm so big on like embodiment, because I tend to be a very heady person and like drift upwards and try to, like you said, compartmentalize things, understand things, but really like dropping in and like making that sort of a practice to always return to your center and to your body. And this is where sort of the two come together, like Christos and Sophia, Eros and Logos.
Absolutely. And I would argue that it's a very different experience for a man to return to his embodied center compared to a woman. Male experience of life is vastly different from female experience of life. For one thing, we have this literal void templated into our biology, our uterus, our womb. It's like we literally walk around the world as women with a hole, a creational hole, like inside of us at all times. And it's a very different experience when, in my own practice, in the work that I've been steeped in for many years now, when I'm like really down in her, like in the literal personal void that is, of course, connected to the greater Sophia principle, or the greater, feminine void mystery principle. When I'm like actually down rooted in my womb, which of course it's built into our biology, we are forced to drop down and descend into our wombs every single month as cycling women. When I'm down there, it's a vastly different experience of life. It's like an altered state of being. And I would just be so curious also even to hear from you, given that I don't often get interviewed by men. When you say dropping into your body, where does that localize itself somatically for you? Like, is it at sort of the point of the hara, to sort of use like a term from Eastern medicine, or is it your heart? Like when you say dropping down and sort of recentering, like literally, where is that for you?
Such a wonderful question. So my first response would be like in my whole body, just the feeling of like for me it's always I've practiced this in yoga. Like have you heard of Ujjayi breath? That's like the
Hmm.
yogic breath,
Yes.
and it's become sort of a habit for me. And whenever I get stressed, my body automatically drops into this like deeper breath, and then where do I localize this in my body? It's like this whole feeling of being alive. It's like this breath in and this expansion, and
Mm.
me in my body feeling that I'm alive.
Mhm.
That's how I would describe it. And then that is to be distinguished between something else, which is just like centering myself in my heart. That's a whole different. That to me is more like an arrival, like an arriving,
Mm.
just like the safe space. So I would say there's one aspect is the aliveness in my whole body, just like out of the head into the body and feeling like the cells that are like it's such a wonder to be in this human body that every single cell is constantly working for you, keeping you alive, giving its every like its best, so to
Yes.
speak. And that kind of feeling versus or not versus I'd say and the feeling of just arriving in my center, in my heart. And
Mm.
I mean, well, you can arrive everywhere. You can arrive down in your sacral chakra, you can arrive in your root. It really depends to me where I need to be, so to speak. Like sometimes my energy field requires me to root down, and
Mhm.
then the focus obviously needs to be down in my root center.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's sort of like the hara, like you said, that term, like in your power center, the solar plexus and sacral. But most often, I'd say it's like the heart space for me. That is sort of like
Mm.
the Christic teaching as well.
Yeah.
Just the flaming heart. This is where it's at.
That is where it's at. Yeah, thank you. Really, thank you. It's
Yeah,
such
thanks.
a
Thanks for the
gift.
question.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's really, this is why I love these types of conversations because, with someone such as yourself, we can play both at that sort of intellectual level, philosophical level, or psycho spiritual level, and then given your background in somatics, in chiropractic work and such, we can speak about these various systems that all play together and
Right.
ideally bring them into more and more harmony. Or, for anyone who's listening, this is always my hope and my prayer that it just provides, a pathway into deeper gnosis and connection with the now, just with the now, with what is.
Mm.
And, everyone speaks so much about presence. And it's a beautiful thing to speak about. It's a very different thing to actually feel the now
Right.
and be with her as she unfolds. Like, you can't make it up. So thank you for playing with me on that one. We switched roles for a second. I was like, "Ooh, is he gonna let me do this?"
Of course. I like to be in conversation.
Amazing.
Just not just like the rigid interview style, and just
Yeah.
see what wants to unfold, what wants to flow. Yeah, you mentioned just something that is very present right now, to be present, like to be in presence, and you called it her, which is quite interesting to me. I don't know, have you studied David Data's work? I find his definitions of masculine and feminine quite interesting, like his perspective, because he speaks on the feminine as sort of like movement and everything that is like alive and changing, and the masculine as in the frame, like the presence holding that movement, being the container. And yeah, you're speaking of the presence as her. That is interesting to me.
Yeah, I understand why. To answer your question, I've only given Data's work really a cursory glance in terms of his source material. But of course, I've heard it, brought through many different vessels, because of course he's taught thousands and thousands of people at this
Right.
point. And many of those people are also teachers and guides in their own right. So I've certainly received his teachings sort of titrated through different people's systems.
Yeah.
And familiar with what you're referring to. So that witnessing quality, totally with you, totally down. Like, I'm right there in terms of that being, let's say, archetypally masculine, which of course doesn't mean male. It's not like confined to just males.
Glad you're bringing that up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in terms of definitions, like, we're talking archetypes, right? So, energy is energy. It's going to manifest in different ways through different human vessels. Like, it is what it is. Like, I'm definitely not 100% archetypally feminine. I'm super clean. Nor would I want to be, because my life would be absolute chaos if I were. Absolute chaos. Because that's what she is, in a way. So when I said her, what I'm referring to when I say her is the actual what is. So there's the witnessing of what is, but the what is exactly that thing that you're referring to from Data's work, is the unfoldment. And it's like, presence, of course, is being with what is, but the what is her. So I'm being with her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how I feel
beautifully
it, anyway.
Described. Like, it's so palpable for me right now. I hope it is for the viewers as well. It's really just that the masculine principle, like viewing her dance, so to speak, like her dancing, her expressing, and that is the here and now, just the life expressing itself through us.
Lifing.
Lifing, exactly. And it's always going to bring more life.
Yes, precisely. Yes. Yeah, so you mentioned dance, which is a fun little topic, because you know what I sense and what I feel from you, as as you're bringing these pieces through, and as you continue to develop even this specific podcast, let alone your larger body of work, is there's this like desire for more union between Logos and Eros, which, good news, we're on the same team, right? And one of the ways that I have found, somatically speaking, that brings you right into the moment of what is, and there's no way of escaping it, in terms of that, that union, or rather perhaps like where there's a gap in yourself of willingness to actually be in union between those two principles, is literally dance. And specifically, as you know already, through partner dance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful, beautiful container, right, that places two people into very explicit roles. Of course, there are differences dance to dance, so, and there's also co-creation, right? There's always both, but there's typically a leader and a follower, and that can be people of either sex. Doesn't matter. But the point is, when people engage in a dance, they're choosing to take on a role of either leader or follower, such that they can come into communion and have a shared language for, okay, who is, giving impulses, who is receiving them, and then the follower, how she, for example, to use myself, because of course I often follow, specifically in Brazilian Zouk, as you know, because you've had the joy of experiencing it now yourself. The follower, she is also very much co-creating. There is no such thing as a passive follow, because the dance literally won't work. Like, there will be no dance. The feminine is actively receptive, like the follower, to kind of continue with the dance metaphor. She is an active participant in the co-creation, even as she is more on the receiving end than the driving or leading end. So for me anyway, like, let's just be real, I was super headstrong growing up, very headstrong. Loved dance, always had a relationship with dance, but it was more so solo. So like ballet, tap, jazz, right?
Yeah.
I got to university. A friend of mine recruited me onto her ballroom dance team, and all of a sudden I realized I couldn't dance because I was not willing to follow. I was
Ah.
just not willing. I was like, no, I want to turn right now. I don't want to wait for you to turn me, you know? And it was a lot of fun and also very, very frustrating to my younger self because, of course, I was confronting in the soma all of the ways that I was unwilling to let go of control. I couldn't escape it. It was right there. It was like, wow, this dance literally will not work if I am unwilling to surrender to my lead, like whoever that person is. Mostly it was men, but not always. And again, like, because again, you're so wanting to ground all of these sort of lofty spiritual principles and such into this earth, right? Like into the body, into these like very tactile vessels. I genuinely like, I can't speak highly enough as to specifically partner dance as a practice modality for grounding all of these lofty concepts into the here and the now, speaking of presence as well. And I know you've had a similar experience, so yeah, for whatever that's worth, I at least wanted to have that on the record as like a pathway, you know, an invitation, really. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, beautifully said. Like, you know, how in ancient cultures, dance has always been part of culture, of tradition, it's been like it played a huge role in almost all societies up until sort of now, where like the youth doesn't dance anymore. It's just they are just going to party. You know, it's not dancing in the.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, we got the balloons.
We got the balloons.
Okay, so for people who are just watching or listening on audio, we have this weird AI thing going on where every time we say a certain word or make a gesture, the the streaming platform, whatever this is, Riverside, it like
Riverside,
releases balloons or it like gives us an okay sign or something like that's really funny. This is like the most entertaining podcast to be
on. Okay, so we got the balloons for partying, I guess.
Maybe if we say it again, it'll happen again, but let's not go there quite yet.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, what I wanted to say is like nowadays, like the youth just goes out to suppress their emotions and their experience. And it's not like we're not growing up being taught how to really dance, like in the ancient cultures where it's like really part of their spirituality.
Sure.
And I think.
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, what do you want to say?
No, just very briefly. I even feel like, you know, if I look at my family, both of my grandparents, or rather, both of my grandfathers immigrated from Europe, and their generation, so not long ago, you know, they were still involved with community groups who literally had dancing as part of what they did on a regular basis to keep the folk traditions alive. And this is, you know, in the mid 1900s, like not that far, you know, not that long ago. So, you know, you say ancient, but of course it's like that, you know.
Yeah, you're so right. Like even my parents, they used to go to dance, you know, just to enjoy themselves, to sort of integrate and process their lives. Basically, it's just a part of your life. And nowadays, I feel like this is missing a lot. And yeah, dance is just can be such a spiritual thing, you know, such a spiritual practice to drop back into our bodies. And as you said, not just like on the receiving end of things, like you said, I really liked how you expressed it, that you have to be like active in terms of being a receiver, like being led, but you also have to like being willing to receive when you're leading. Like that's something that I'm super curious about. If you want to dive deeper into this, like how both the masculine and the feminine are actually like leading, just in different ways, and receiving in different ways. Especially for like men, that's something I'm very big on. Like I'm thinking a lot about this. I'm experimenting a lot about with this, which is like receiving as a man. But that's a different topic. So let's just.
Cool. Well, I don't know if it's different. We just spent a moment in time here, a second ago, sort of lamenting the cultural loss.
Lamenting. I love that word.
Such lamentations. Anyway, the now you have me thinking about Goethe, by the way, of our conversation earlier. Anyway, there's also this, I feel, a deep, deep missing in the rightfulness of men in positions of leadership from a place of service, not ego. Right?
Agreed.
And that particular texture and flavor of, and I really mean this, I mean like the most sort of like stereotypically male beings on this planet, I desire them to have the freedom to build. I want them to penetrate the world with their greatness of their visions. I want that. I am not interested in any cultural narrative that puts a cap on men creating from their virile potency. I'm not interested in that, because that would be anti-nature, which to me means anti-life. I'm not interested in participating in circuitries that are anti-life. So with that as like a background, really quickly, you said something very beautiful that made me sort of sit up straighter and feel called towards this. It was very evocative to me. And it was something along the lines of responsive leading, like receptive leading. And I feel, and especially for men, adult males in these bodies that are equipped with all sorts of, hormones that literally give them fire and fuel to drive every single day. Testosterone being one of them. Like, way more testosterone than a female person as myself has. Like, there is such a thing of that drive, that uncontained, or let's say uncalibrated. So I don't really want to bring containment in, but calibration I do want to bring in. That drive uncalibrated, that drive without responses, without what's the word? Yeah, without a sort of feedback loop of sensitivity of, how is my drive impacting the world, right? It's going to beget imperfect creations. It will beget issues, frankly, because again, to go back to the very first thing we were speaking about today, the Logos principle on its own, it cannot a perfect world make. Like, it cannot build into perfection because it's out of union with the counterpart, Eros. So in terms of responsive leadership, what I have this like great sort of evocative calling towards is fostering these spaces where women can come into right relationship with their innate discernment, again, dropping all the way down into the heart and the womb, and really allowing their sensitivity and what they see sort of oracularly to come forth, to sort of like, if you can envision taking like a ladle and dipping it all the way down into the well and hauling out that really nourishing water and presenting it to a man who is building and leading and striving and penetrating the world as, yes, nourishment for his vision to help it really come to fruit, but also as temperance and calibration to his fire. Because of course, like, if it's just the fire principle, if it's just the solar principle, what do we have? We have a scorched earth. We have barren earth. We have wasteland. If we do not have the water to also come with that fire. So that's why when you said what you said about responsive leadership, my whole body was like, oh yes, we're going to talk about this. So very, very passionate about specifically that.
Would you like to go deeper into like responsive, like into perhaps practical ways of how this could look like responsive leadership in a man?
I thought you'd never ask. No, of
This
course.
is fun.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's super fun. So, you know, let's make it like, I'm gonna make it about me, because this is, it'll make it
Go
universal. The
ahead.
more personal, the more universal. So every single week, my love and I sit down and we have what we call a board meeting, quote unquote, for our union. Now that might sound really heady and very dry, but please bear with me. I promise it's like way more, it's just like way juicier than it sounds. So part of that board meeting is it's a series of questions, essentially, that we're asking each other. And one of those questions, in support of a successful next week in our lives together, is, what is sufficient? He'll ask me this question: what is sufficient for me to win with you this week? What is sufficient? Like, what do you need, Ginger, from me to win this week? And of course, I am more than happy to give him all the feedback in the world of what my needs are. But I know a lot of women aren't at that place of being in right relationship with their needs and their voice. And it's very challenging for most women to even feel what their needs are, let alone to have the courage and wherewithal and sort of like in the moment articulation capacities, when it's something that's so subtle, so fine sometimes, to really pull those needs up and out and present them to a man. So in the context of our union, I've gotten very used to asking for my needs, so much so that every morning at 11 a.m. I have an alarm on my phone, because he asked me to put it on my phone that says, hey, it makes my life and Shane's life easier when I ask for what I need. Why did he ask me to do that? Because I was forgetting to ask for what I needed. I was forgetting to give him feedback such that he could lead us better. I was assuming that he would be able to know everything about my preferences, all of the little particularities about my desires, all of the things that I deeply need. I was assuming that somehow he, because he's quite smart and very attuned and very sensitive, that he would just have that all figured out. Wrong. Not effective. So in terms of like responsive leadership, we actually have sort of baked into our weeks nowadays this opportunity to ask each other. It's a two-way question. He'll ask me, I'll ask him the same thing. Like, what
Right.
do you need from me, right? As well. But we've made it a practice, very, very tangibly so, because of how important it is to not assume we know what the other person needs to feel really, really good, not in just in their bodies, but like in union with us. Like, that takes meeting the moment, right? It's like the emergence of what is will always bring up that question again. Like, are we actually being with the truth of our bodies? Are we tending to our needs, both like individually and in union? So that responsive leadership piece is really like, how can I take responsibility for getting my needs met? And that requires me to speak certain things. And also, frankly, before that, to know certain things about myself.
Right.
To have like self-knowledge, right? Because if
Right.
I can't feel myself, then how am I ever going to be contributing to good leadership in the world, right? And not only that, it's not just about knowing myself, but it is about having the courage to bring forth those more tender needs that get very sticky sometimes. It feels, I'll just give you like because I don't know if you've talked, to women specifically about this piece yet, but what happens for most women when they're trying to be in circuitry with men is they sort of like get jammed up in the works internally with what feels like such high stakes. It feels like real pressure to vocalize something that they feel is very near and dear to their hearts. And perhaps that in the past they've spoken about, they've shared about, and it hasn't been met with a very nice response. It hasn't been met with responsive leadership. And so they've learned that their needs don't matter. Like, that's my childhood in a nutshell. I'm really great at attuning to everybody else's needs, like little Ginger. But like, when you ask me, back then, what do you need? I was like, what do you mean? I don't need anything. I don't have, it's all about everybody else, right? So that's another very, very like common female/feminine pattern in relationship is to almost martyr oneself in the name of service, right? Like, of course, we can make it look nice on the outside, but inside we are starving. We're not nourished. And that will happen over and over and over again. And what will also happen typically, if a woman has experienced something that was painful in the past when she did actually voice a need of hers, maybe imperfectly, let's say, but she will not actually want to have any man in a position of power because she's afraid of him failing her yet again. She's afraid of him not attuning to her yet again. And so she'd rather be in control of everything, because at least then she knows she can get her needs met her own way, right? But of course, that then totally blocks her from the erotic bliss of surrender and even more of the like baseline need that women have to relax, to actually just be, and to not have to strive and earn and produce all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, in somatics we call this whole topic, let's put it that way, we call it fawn response, or like people pleasing is a term that many people use. And it's like you had a bad experience, some trauma that stored in your body, and then whenever you want to voice your needs, that you like, first and foremost, you can't even really like feel your needs because they feel dangerous, and so you learn how to attune and like, yeah, basically meet other people's needs in order to feel safe. This is where nervous system regulation and somatics comes in then, because if you're not regulated, if you don't know how to feel safe within yourself, you're not really able to feel, sense, and let alone like voice your needs.
Exactly. Yeah, there's always some perceived threat, right?
Exactly.
And of course, in the face of that, no genuine communication is possible. It's always going to be sort of blocked by that more primal fear response. So, yeah. Which, interestingly, like, again, just to give a pathway if people are listening and they're like, wait, totally, that's me. What do I do about that? Just one of the ways that I have recently learned through a modality called neurosculpting is
interesting.
Yeah, you can check it out. It's a really beautiful modality. So for, again, kind of going in the neuroplasticity direction and also the nervous system direction. But when we have those sort of like fearful moments, or like freeze moments in a way, the way to sort of like transfer where the consciousness is in the brain from the midbrain back to the sort of like frontal cortex is to bring curiosity through a question, to literally just ask a question. It doesn't really matter what question, but it switches the consciousness into a different part of the brain. So if we're just dealing with the mental layer, obviously that's not dealing with the somatics, but that can help then to sort of like interrupt the whole response in the system that's like going into sort of like freeze shutdown mode, and stifling the voice. Just
super
like a tiny
helpful
little pathway.
Yeah, it's those tiny things, like for example, if we're on the practical side now, orienting in your room is one thing that I've grown to love, just really love. Like whenever I start something, whenever I start a session, I always like drop in my body and orient myself in the room. Like just take a minute or something and really let your gaze wander around your room. Yeah, just for a minute, that's enough, in your own pace. Let your gaze wander in the room, like as if you were looking at an artwork. And that's actually telling your nervous system that it's safe right now.
Exactly.
And then, as you beautifully said, you're no longer just in the reptilian brain, like in your brainstem. You are actually activating your neocortex again, and then you can think creatively and solve problems again. Which before, if your neocortex is shut down and your reptilian brain is just active alone, you're in survival mode. You're just reacting. You're just like trying to like playing out old patterns of survival, basically.
Yeah.
And these, just to bring this full circle, these little things, that's what I've realized over the years. Little things matter so much. Like, they are adding up, like these little beautiful experiences, like a smile of a stranger. It's, in somatics we call it glimmer, which is the opposite of a trigger.
Oh, I love that.
Such a beautiful term, because everyone's so focused on like triggers and like, this is my triggers and I have to like learn how to navigate those and like whatever. But glimmer is actually the opposite of a trigger, which means you're walking down the street, just as an example, and a person smiles at you and you're like, and all of a sudden your nervous system is totally regulated. You're like, oh, this typical sigh of like relief, and your whole mood is changed. Another example would be like you meet a dog and you pet the dog and you're like, oh, before you had like a totally crappy day. Or you smell some flowers, or the sun comes out just for a second. Those glimmers. Goes back to Stephen Porges and I think Deb Dana. She describes it in her book, The Practical Polyvagal Theory.
Thank you. Beautiful reference. I will look into that. I love the word glimmer. It's just so magical as well. Like, to me, I feel the word beacon coming through very often in terms of like the soul path stuff, and glimmers feel like mini beacons.
Mini beacon. Yeah,
like
yeah,
mini beacons. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah. And also, I just have to comment, because of course you know this about me. It was funny to hear you say like, and when the sun comes out just for a moment. I'm like, yes, he does live in Germany. I remember when it was like that. See, I live in Colorado. We have sunshine 300 days a year, Felix.
Really?
So, yes, really. That's why I moved
my
here.
God.
I was done with German winters. I was totally done. It's like,
oh my God. We have like at least 3 months consecutively where there's no sun. Like, if you get a glimmer of sun,
Speaking of glimmers. No, and on a more somber note, not to like end on this note, but speaking of this journey that we're all on, like for myself, actually one of those winters in Germany that I lived there for, in total it was 4 years, and in one Stück it was 3, just in one piece. But one of those winters was literally the darkest winter on record in Germany for about 50 years. And that was precisely the winter that coincided with a very not fun breakup for me, like really broke my heart. And that was also, because of those combination of factors and other things as well. Physical health issues that I was having at the time. This was back in like 2012. I actually like, that was the first and probably only time that I can really like feel that I was depressed for 8 months. And as you experience me now, I have a fairly sunny disposition, or at least like generally even keeled, whatever that means. But it was really challenging to not only be heartbroken, but also then to have the deprivation of solar logos from my life. Literally no sun for 6 months, I think it was at that time. It was nuts. I would never want to repeat that experience. But I will say what was interesting about that, and not just interesting, that's like sort of a nothing burger word. What was a gift out of that experience was, even in the depths of that winter, like I was crying very often. I cried probably every day for that whole winter. And that's, it was rough. And I was working full time, and I had to sort of like maintain some sort of a composure. Not persona, but maintain composure and such. And yet, like, even through that, I still didn't feel totally alone. I didn't feel abandoned by God. I didn't feel like somehow I was totally lost to all despair. Like, for whatever reason, I was given the gift of like a deep knowing that there was another side. Like, I was in it. I was really in the down, for months and months and months, but I never lost faith, which was not a religious thing for me. Certainly not. But I don't know. It was like this gift that when I came out the other side, ultimately, I was like, oh yeah, I never actually really totally lost myself. Like I don't know why. This was like a mystery of my life. This is not something that I just look back and I'm like, wow, 24-year-old me, like, didn't succumb to that, even though she was super depressed. Like, I don't know why. So anyway, yeah, it's sort of a background story on my spiritual journey, which perhaps can be of service to someone.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Yeah, of course.
So Ginger, just asking you, you said you have to go in an hour before we started. Is there anything that's still wanting to come through?
I feel fairly complete, actually. Yeah.
Feels like a
I feel
complete
just grateful
episode. Me too. This was so much fun with you. I'm so honored to have you as my first guest on this podcast.
First of many, I'm sure. And I'd be happy to come back anytime. And
cool.
Just in general,
I might come back to you. Definitely.
Yeah, please do, of course. You know where to find me. And speaking of which, actually, that's a good segue. So if I may.
that would be my next question.
Amazing. So, most of my writing and just general expression happens via Instagram. I'm sure, Felix, you'll put that in sort of the show notes and link my profile there, but that's Mythic. And otherwise, there are various ways to sort of come closer into my orbit. I've been on numerous podcasts as well. Not all of them this philosophical. I enjoyed this one. But certainly, I have this, of course, group program coming up that will be open for enrollment fairly soon. And genuinely, that is, it's a beautiful advanced journey for consorts and oracles to powerful men. That will be called Chalice. And then I have my one-on-one mentorship, and I do have a wait list for that. So if you're interested, just pop over to my newsletter, shoot me an email or shoot me a note and just say, hey, I'm interested in getting on the wait list for that type of one-on-one support. And other than that, plenty of little meditations and visualizations if women want to. This is specific to women now. If women really want to drop into their bodies in a very accessible way, I do have some guided visualizations out there as well. And I'm sure you'll have the links in the show notes for those too. So.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you, Ginger.
So welcome.
With that, thank you for tuning in, and I would greatly appreciate if you leave an honest review or subscribe to my YouTube channel wherever you're listening to this podcast. I hope this episode with Ginger served you well, and thank you again for being here and journeying with us together.